So we are now recording and everyone from the lobby has been admitted into the meeting.
Good afternoon. Welcome to this public meeting of the Northern Beaches Local Planning Panel. My name is Peter Biscoe. I'm the chair of the panel. And with me today on the panel are Cara Crusson and Marcus Sainsbury, who are both expert members of the panel, and John Simmons, the community representative. As a sign of respect, the panel acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands in which we gather and pays respects to their elders, past and present. We have two matters on the public meeting items agenda today, and there are also two non-public meeting items, which I will refer to for the sake of completeness. The two public meeting items, first of all, item 4.1 in the agenda, DA 2022/1443, relating to 90 Queenscliff Road, Queenscliff. This is a development application for demolition works and construction of a residential flat building and strata subdivision. Item 4.2, DA 2022/1193, relating to 20 Avon Road, DY, is a DA for demolition works and construction of a residential flat building, including strata subdivision. The two non-public meeting items, which we will proceed to consider after we conclude the hearing in relation to the public meeting items, are, first of all, item 5.1 on the agenda, a modification application 2022/0664 relating to 398 Sydney Road, Balgala. Now, this one is for modification of development consent REV 2021/0012, granted for demolition works and construction of a shop-top housing development. Finally, the last non-public meeting item, 5.2 on the agenda, is DA 2022/1468, relating to 26 Wandella Road, Allambie Heights, for demolition works, subdivision of one lot into two, construction of a dwelling house upon each lot, and one swimming pool. I'll just mention at this point that the minutes of the panel held on the 5th of April 2023 were adopted by the chairperson and have been posted on Council's website. We have a number of registered speakers for the two public meeting items. The time allocated for oral submissions to the panel is 3 minutes. That time can be extended if it's deemed appropriate, if you seek leave to do so from the chair. Without any further ado, and I should just mention that the procedure is that we hear all the matters that are listed for the public hearing, and then the panel adjourns into closed session to deliberate and make its decision in relation to those matters, and also deliberate and consider the non-public meeting items. Normally we reach a decision on the same day. That is usually the case, and the minutes are posted within 24 hours. So we'll proceed now to the first item on the public meeting agenda, item 4.1, DA 2022/1443, relating to 90 Queenscliff Road, Queenscliff, for demolition works and construction of a residential flat building and strata subdivision. There are four objectors registered to speak. Chris Leal-Cock of 94 Queenscliff Road, Queenscliff, Andreas Feist of 88 Queenscliff Road, Queenscliff, Andrew Glance and Deborah Bingham of 47 Greycliff Street, Queenscliff, and Jeffrey Burney of 92 Queenscliff Road, Queenscliff. So I'll call upon those objectors in that order, and after I hear them, I'll then proceed to hear the registered speakers for the applicant, who are Paul and Tracy Oates, the owner, Greg Boston of BBF Planners, and Paul Bolshevik of PBD Architects. First objector on the list is Chris Leal-Cock. Mr. Leal-Cock, would you like to address the panel?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 4 points to make. The first one is the development site, 90 Queenscliff Road. In relation to that site, all along Queenscliff Road, from Greycliff Street to Bridge Road, on our side of the street, is is zoned R2 with maximum of 2 stories. And this is what every resident has been regulated to and been managed under. Next point I wanted to talk about was developer credibility. So Paul Oates was the head of development at the huge Dexus Property Group and for 8 years and Woolworths for 12 years. So he knows development very well. He knowingly purchased the premises of 90 Queenscliff, fully aware it was zoned R2, maximum 2 units. He immediately converted the garage into a 3rd unit without council approval. Despite substantial complaints from neighbours, it was approved by council retrospectively under questionable circumstances. He then submitted a DA for 5 units, and after community outrage on non-compliance, it was withdrawn. So to me, this is intent and disregard for rules in the community were laid bare from day one. The third point is around invalid DA. In 2017, council approved the 3rd unit in retrospect on a technicality, saying the proposal is supportable for approval, and I quote directly from the document, alterations and additions to an existing residential building containing 2 dwellings to create 3 dwellings only. So those words, council assured the community it was approved only because it was internal to the existing facade. On this basis, any new development outside the existing facade should automatically forfeit the right to 3 dwellings and revert to R2. So this DA is illegal and invalid based on the council's own assurances and approval back in 2017. And council is ignoring its written commitment to the community in this approval. The 4th point is this development, the existing building is bulky and exceeds all regulatory rules. This can be seen in overhead photos on council's own website. So to suggest further extensions, including extending forward by 3 to 4 meters and sideways to the boundary wall, are compliant is frankly ludicrous. It also sets a dangerous precedent under R2 zoning in this area and exceeding 2 stories. Most questionable in this DA is it has hardly changed from the original submitted 5 units. So it has just been made to look like 3 units, and residents would question what is to stop it from being converted to 5 units down track, given council's previous assurances that were not approved or followed through on. So in summary, the developer has significant financial resources and can bring an army of advisors to twist the rules to his desires. Residents don't have these resources, so we would strongly recommend members of this panel do the right thing by the community. After all, there are 23 objections to this development, and your credibility in representing fairness to the community by directing this development would be appreciated. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Lealcock. The next registered speaker, sorry, has anybody got any questions of Mr. Lealcock? No, thank you. The next registered speaker as an objector is Mr. Andreas Feist of 88 Queenscliff Road, Queenscliff. Mr. Feist, would you like to address the panel? Sorry, we can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Okay, is that better now?
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For context, I reside to the east of the property on the neighbouring house at 88 Queenscliff Road. And I guess I'd like to point out that in terms of my objections, they have been stated fairly clearly on the letter that I wrote to Council on 21st of the 12th, 2002, and because as Mr. Lealcock has outlined, the lack of progress in relation to the previous requirement, my previous objection dated 20th December 2022 also applies. Clearly, as has just been outlined, the development application is inconsistent with what's being allowed in the neighbouring properties. This is a low density precinct within Queenscliff, and it's quite separate and distinct from the regulations that apply on the north side of Queenscliff Road opposite the subject property. The side boundary setback in particular remains of concern, especially in regards to the upper levels. And council has noted 11% variation of the east wall height to the development controls, and that can only present as a very oppressive scenario when built. The excavation is also excessive, and at 0 to a metre along the eastern boundary, Council has noted it's up to 100% variation to the build form controls with regard to the side boundary setbacks. The original part of our home is approaching 100 years in age, with very brittle bricks and mortar, and remains to be seen whether the building will remain intact under the circumstances suggested. I'd also like to note a particular concern regarding privacy impact. The privacy concerns arise from the proposal to continue to extend the property towards the rear and front of the property. At the rear of the property, it'll provide distinct sight lines into our living areas, our dining area, our bedroom, and our study. And you can't assume that that'll be ameliorated by the existing hedge that we've got, because that's unlikely to survive the excavation, notwithstanding the arborist report as commissioned by the developer. And you can't assume that that's a permanent arrangement. There's been no allowance made for privacy screens on the eastern side of the property, and there will also be no photo montage or materials schedules provided from the southeastern aspect, and that could obviously be by intent, but it doesn't make clear the degree of the invasion of privacy which will incur. I guess the other aspect I'd like to comment on very briefly is the building bulk addressed in the list of amendments provided by the applicant. Council has clearly requested a front setback to be consistent with that of an apartment building. Clearly, the applicant currently has a duplex. He wants to develop that into a residential flat building, into an apartment. His counter argument to not adhering to the apartment setback regulations is that it should be read as a duplex. Clearly, he is wanting it both ways here. It can't be both a duplex and a residential flat building. And in Council's own words, it's pretty clear from the assessment that it is a residential flat building. It should be considered in the context of presenting as an apartment. That's well and truly my 3 minutes done, so thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Fairs. Does the panel have any questions? No, thank you. Well, in that case, we'll move on to the third objectors who are registered to speak. They're registered jointly, Andrew Glance and Deborah Bingham of 47 Greycliff Street, Queenscliff. Would you like to address the panel?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. Yes, so my name's Andrew Glance, and along with Deborah Bingham, we're the owners of 47 Greycliff Street. Our property backs directly onto the south or rear boundary of 90 Queenscliff Road. As I'm sure those that have inspected, you would have realised that effectively our property is essentially built into the rear south boundary of 90 Queenscliff Road, essentially meaning that you can jump from essentially the backyard of 90 Queenscliff Road onto our roof, essentially on 47 Greycliff. Consistent with Andreas's comments previously, I think from our perspective, with regards to matter 5 concerns that excavations may damage adjoining properties, there's no mention in the geotechnical report about work being done pre and post construction on 47 Greycliff Street, only to that of 90 Queenscliff. Our bathroom and courtyard walls are at subground level, backing directly onto 90 Queenscliff Road. So our walls are built directly into the boundary of Queenscliff Road. So our roof is effectively at their ground level. It would be ignorant to think that any excavation done will not have any likely impact on, i.e. those walls, but more importantly, the structural integrity of our property, which is 130 years old. So I think from our perspective, again, like Andreas's comments prior, if this was to go through, at very least, the owners of 90 Queenscliff Road should be responsible for a geotechnical report on 47 Greycliff Street, being at our property, and any damage done in turn as a result of excavation should be at their cost. With regards to matter 11, impact on privacy, including overlooking, again, consistent with Andreas's comments, It's interesting that council have come back and requested that privacy screens be applied to the west side of the property. There is no consideration for effectively south or east. Now, from the south, on the second and third floors of the proposed property, they will look directly into our kitchen and rear courtyard. Now, in previous submissions, we asked for smaller balconies or at very least frosting of glass to effectively, I suppose, improve privacy, but they were ignored. Interesting part about landscaping then will effectively in turn reduce sunlight. So in conclusion, if this was to be approved, we seek amendments to the proposal to include full geotechnical reports to be done on our property being at 47 Greycliff at the cost of the owners of 90 Queenscliff Road, including any costs associated with damage to be picked up by them. And at very least, also frosted glass to be applied to the rear balconies to improve privacy from our perspective with regards to our rear amenities. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Glance. Was Ms. Bingham, who's registered as a speaker, intending to speak?
No, she's not. She's actually on a trip at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. Then I think that takes us. So does the panel have any questions of Mr. Glance?
No.
No. All right. Thank you. In that case, we go to the last of these objectors or registered to speak, Mr. Jeffrey Burney of 92 Queenscliff Road. Mr. Burney, would you like to address the panel?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Look, my major concern with this development is the excessive extension out the front, the setback business. Now, I have the 99-page document that comes with this from the council, and even in that, there appears to be some confusion as to what the setback should be. In parts, on page 18 of it, it says that the proposal has a compliant front setback. Later on, though, it mentions that it's not compliant. And then again, on the page following that, it says that it is compliant. Now, the council...
Could you give us the page references where you say it's not compliant?
Well, on page 46, it says that the compliance is 6.5 metres, that what's being proposed is 6.6 metres, and that it does comply. Well, obviously, that's only 100 millimetres, but we're talking about an extension of, from my point of view, of nearly 3 metres out the front of my house. And even though the applicant has said that I'm not going to lose any sunlight, clearly I am. I'm on the western side of this building. I'm going to lose a lot of my morning sun from this development. Now, the sunlight diagram that they supply is from 9 o'clock. Now, we're talking about the 21st of June, the coldest day of the year. That's only one day of the year. The sun, I get sunlight in July as well, and in August. I also get sun in April and May. Now, they'll be lost by this early morning sun. Now, on page 47, about 4 lines down, it says B7, front boundary setbacks. Compliance? No. So in the space of one page, it's gone from yes to no, and we see that 6.5 metres is said to be the compliance. Now, that's for houses. As Mr. Fasty has pointed out, this is now a block of flats. It's not a duplex anymore. It's a block of flats, and it ought to be compliant with the council. Now, council's rules. Now, I say that, look, even though that's only 100 millimetre difference, really, any reduction in the bulk of this building would be a boon to me as far as I'm concerned. And I just don't see why this developer is allowed to push the building out so far when the rest of, when he currently is aligned with my property. And that is clearly the building line. How he got to how he's decided on this 6.5 metre thing, I don't know. I guess because he's got that from the council. But as I say, the building is too bulky from my point of view and does block my sun and also encloses my property further. As the years have gone by, my little backyard has become more and more overlooked, and now I'm going to have a 3-story building, other than a 2-story building, right next door to me, looking down onto my backyard and my deck, the only private parts of my property that I currently enjoy. Now, I have an extensive garden planted, admittedly, in order to give me some privacy, but this building will simply overlook what I've got. And I would really like some amelioration of this plan, if we could possibly have it. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Burney. Does the panel have any questions of Mr. Burney? No. All right. Well, then in that case, we'll move on to the registered speakers for the applicant, who I've previously identified. Paul and Tracy Oates, the owner, Greg Boston, BBF Planners, and Paul Bujovic, PBD Architects. Mr. and Mrs. Oates, do you wish to address the panel?
Yes, we do, very briefly, if that's okay.
Yes.
And I'll just speak on behalf of my wife and I. And obviously, as you've mentioned, we've got 2 other talkers. So I've just, I guess we've got to 4 years into this journey at this point. Certainly, it's been a lot longer and required a lot more work and focus than what we thought we would need when we set out. But we're happy with the design. We think it's a great solution for this project, and we think that the downsize for us moving into one of these apartments, the middle floor, will be a great answer for our family. It's taken a long and collaborative effort. We've got a top team of consultants, absolutely, very accomplished architect and planning, landscaping and the rest. Council staff have been very forthright in this journey and been provided us a lot of guidance on which way to go, as have DSAP. The new build was arrived at post our application to amend and alts and adds of the existing property. That new build does, in our view, and council staff's view and DSAP's view, address many of the issues and give comfort to the neighbours, despite clearly the sentiment that is before you today. We can reassure that the neighbours that legitimate concerns have been taken into account and addressed using council's planning guidelines and expertise. The council have been very active on this. A couple of the key ones just to call out is the lily-pilly hedge to the east. Detailed arbitrist report. We've stepped them and modified our basement walls around the hedge and got a tree protection order. We have 7 metres of rock between us and the southern neighbour. Clearly we'll do dilapidation reports. It's a requirement of the conditions. I really think that 7 metres of rock is a pretty substantial amount on that headland. The landscaping is a massive improvement from what we have currently, 120 square metres currently up to 205 square metres. The amenity we've achieved in focusing the building to the front and the rear rather than to the sides, which it currently does. I'll just draw your attention, the rear setback, we've got a carport in that setback, and the building is only 4.4 metres setback from the rear. We're now 7 metres and 8.3 to the building. The Balkan scale, the building is actually 1 metre lower than the existing roof line, and the western elevation is much improved from what it is. We did adopt the majority of the DSAP recommendation, including deleting 2 bathrooms to reduce Balkan scale. So I guess just in summary, without going into too much of the detail, it's been a long 4-year journey. We're hopeful that this gets to the end of our DA journey, and we're very appreciative of council's diligence in getting what we think is a steer on a good solution for the count from the site from Alex Keller, Rod Piggott, and Peter Robinson. And I think previously Rebecca England as well was paramount in advising us. So that's our address in terms of owners on behalf of Trace and I.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Does the panel have any questions for Mr. Rhodes?
Peter, I have questions for the applicant, but I'm not sure if we want to hear from all representatives of the applicant first.
Yes, we can proceed in that fashion by all means. Mr. Boston, would you like to address the panel?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Greg Boston, consultant planner. Look, the report is nothing short of comprehensive in terms of dealing with the statutory planning considerations and also the resident issues raised through the assessment process. There's a number of draft conditions. We raise no objections to the conditions as put. And just while we're on the conditions, I note that the concern raised in relation to pre and post dilapidation reporting is dealt with in, I think, condition 32 in terms of the pre-dilapidation reporting. We're in the panel's hands as to whether they would like to also incorporate the Greycliff Road property into the required properties in relation to dilapidation reporting, but we do note that there's a substantial setback between the proposed excavations. That's approximately 7 metres. And that adjoining property, and ordinarily that wouldn't itself trigger a need for that sort of reporting. In terms of the history of development, council records agree with the applicant's proposition that the original approval for development on the site involved a building containing flats. And to that extent, the application relies on existing use rights in relation to that building topology. Previous application back in 2021 for alterations and additions was reported to this very panel with a recommendation for approval, ultimately refused on the basis of concerns regarding the adaptive reuse and the consequential amenity outcomes, and also the fact that the at-grade car parking which was maintained was quite clumsy in terms of potential impacts on the neighbours and preventing a greater level of design excellence. This application addresses the issues of the panel. It provides basement car parking. It provides a contemporary building compliant with SEP 65 and the ADG. Particular care was given to compliance with the 8.5 metre height control. The landscaped area provision, as indicated in the report, is substantially improved, and the setbacks that would ordinarily apply to dwelling house development, being 1 metre setbacks to both side boundaries, are obviously substantially increased. Now, DSAP did raise some concerns in regards to the bulk and scale of the upper level as viewed from the street, and that resulted in a reduction in floor space at the upper level and more of a recessive element in relation to the presentation of that element in the street. And Plan DA 400, which is the schedule of materials sort of superimposed on a 3D perspective, just shows that the upper level is certainly recessive in a streetscape context, and certainly consistent with other 3-storey elements established in the streetscape. So look, fundamentally, I'm here to answer any questions that the panel might raise. We ask that the documentation. Just quickly in relation to a couple of the issues raised, that the front setback control is 6.5 metres. The proposal is setback 6.6 metres. The only breaching element is the bin storage area, which is required to be there for council's wheel-in, wheel-out service. That is now in an agreed location in an agreed form. In relation to privacy impacts, you'll note that the western edges of the elevated balconies have been provided with fixed privacy screens, as have a number of the side boundary facing windows where appropriate. In terms of privacy impacts, to the south-facing rear yards. Obviously, all the properties along this escarpment are orientated to the south to take advantage of views. There is already an established mutual overlooking arrangement where there's a balance between obtaining views and retention of privacy, and we believe that the proposal strikes that particular balance. Apart from that, happy to answer any questions that might arise.
Thank you. There is one further registered speaker for the applicant, namely Paul Buljevic of PBD Architects. Before I ask the panel whether they have any questions of the applicant speakers, Mr. Buljevic, would you like to address the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll try not to echo too much of what's been said from a planning sense and our client, but I may just focus on how we've used our design to address some of those key issues that have been raised today, which I've summarised as being side setbacks, excavation, some privacy concerns, building bulk generally, privacy and excavation again. So I guess in summary, that the built form has been designed in a manner that it presents as quite defensive to the side boundary interface conditions. So there are either supplementary openings or non-habitable conditions to those elevations. And where we do have supplementary openings to habitable rooms, they are actually screened. There was a concern raised by the eastern neighbour with respect to privacy screening. I think there was a suggestion that there aren't any privacy screens adopted. The plans actually do indicate privacy screening along those openings. So the primary outlooks are towards a south and a northern orientation. As Greg had mentioned, there's a 6.6 metre setback towards the main street interface, and the rear sort of varies between 7 and 8.5 metres. And you'll notice that the articulation is such that the side boundary setbacks also vary to allow indentation and some outlook that isn't primarily orientated towards the side. So that's very conscious in terms of the way the built form has been designed in that manner. The private open space on the upper levels of those balconies to the rear is quite modest. There are components of solidity on those balconies towards the side boundary, again with consideration some privacy screening adopted on that western frontage where it abuts the neighbour, or where it has an orientation towards the neighbour. There were some comments made around excavation. I sort of echo Greg's comments and our clients around working with the geotechnical consultant, and obviously any dilapidation reporting required during the course of construction is something they would imagine would be a standard condition of consent, and we'd be happy to adopt for those primary neighbours. In terms of building bulk, the built form has quite deliberately been presented as a two-storey with an upper level sort of setback and recessed with a change in materiality, and I think that's evident in the design. There was a late change, which was in consultation with council at an increase of 2.5 metres from that primary street facing setback for the upper level. I think that's resulted in a better outcome, and I thank council for working with us in achieving what we believe is a very sound architectural result and a good outcome for the site. That's it on my end. Unless there's any direct questions, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Mr. Buljevic, does the panel have any questions of any of the applicants' speakers?
Yeah, Peter, I do.
Yeah.
My questions relate to the geotechnical investigations. And I note that the report, the geotechnical assessment report, was dated August 2022, and that's referenced in proposed condition 1. The draft condition 17 then indicates that the recommendations of that assessment as identified in that report are to be incorporated in the construction plans. Based on what I was hearing from submitters today, I went and had another look at the geotechnical assessment report that's referenced in that condition 1. And it's an assessment report rather than an investigation report. And I know in particular that it concludes that a detailed site stability geotechnical report is required for this development, and that investigation, including on-site testing and reporting, will be required prior to CC. Now, noting that draft condition 17 indicates that the recommendations of that earlier assessment report are to be incorporated in the plans, it's just seeming like to me that maybe perhaps inadvertently there's a step that's been skipped through draft conditions here. It appears that the recommendation of the assessment report is that a more detailed investigation needs to be done, and I would assume that based on that more detailed investigation, that any detailed design plan, should it be approved, would be documented. Is that understanding correct, that there is still the intention to do a detailed geotechnical investigation that might be missing from the draft conditions, and if so, has that been commenced, or is that something that you're assuming would be required prior to the CC being lodged?
Cara, Mr. Chair, is it all right if I answer that question directly?
Yes.
Yeah, so clearly with excavation, a geotech report from Crozier Geotech Consultants was commissioned. That report, if I'm just reading from it, from this preliminary investigation, it appears that the proposed basement and driveway excavation will extend through low to medium strength sandstone bedrock, which is likely to be self-supporting, although will be confirmed during geotechnical investigations and with inspections during the excavation works to identify any potential unfavourable oriented defects. We are excavating into solid sandstone on the headland of Queenscliff. It is really it is unfathomable that is an issue for that requires further investigation than this prior to a DA. But clearly, if there are some local anomalies in that sandstone bedrock, then that will be identified and addressed in the normal course of a construction certificate, and then during construction with the inspections from the geotech, civil engineer and structural engineer as we go through.
Yeah, I think it's more the paragraph above that one that you just read out that I was questioning about the requirement for an investigation. So that previous paragraph says that this original assessment's been done for the DA, then there would be a more detailed investigation prior to CC. It might be a question really for council's officers that perhaps inadvertently the conditions as they are drafted are more standard in terms of that they will condition the geotech assessment, and then the plans need to document the recommendations of that assessment. But because in this case your assessment recommends a detailed investigation, then the plans would really need to be prepared post that detailed investigation. So, Peter, perhaps it's a clarification or a question of council officers to answer whether that would be skipped or whether it was intentional in the drafting of the conditions for that recommendation not to be embedded in the conditions.
Right. Okay, we can take that one aboard for inquiry later. Is there anything, do any of the applicant speakers wish to respond further to this point that has been raised? And if not, then does the panel have any other questions of any of the applicant's speakers?
Mr. Chair, sorry, it's Andrew Glantz from 47 Greycliff Street here. Paul, Greg, whilst...
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Glantz, this is the opportunity for the panel to ask questions. We don't have cross-examination by objectors of the applicant normally, nor vice versa, I hate.
No, I apologise for that. I don't necessarily think the question was answered, but anyway, let's move on.
Yeah, no problems. So does the panel have any further questions of any of the applicant speakers?
Yes, Chair, just briefly, if I may. Probably for Mr. Boston, you talked about achieving a balance, particularly to the south with respect to, I guess, the view, obtaining the views and balancing the sort of privacy impacts to the property on Greycliff Street. Are you able to just talk briefly about some of the initiatives, or perhaps Paul, baked into the design in its current stage that has achieved that balance in your view?
Paul, did you want to speak further? I'm happy to lead.
I guess, sorry, the question was with respect to privacy towards the rear?
Yes, correct. Just keen to understand, and I think it might be useful to help explain just some of the, I guess, design initiatives that have been incorporated there to achieve that balance of privacy and obtaining the views.
Absolutely. I think that the setback there varies from the lower two levels, which are in the order of 7 metres, which would increase to the building line on the uppermost story of 8.65 metres. So I think that the setback dimension in itself is something that would exceed the balance of a burden of a typical separation distance between buildings under the ADG. And I know it is only 3 apartments and the ADG isn't necessarily applicable, but we have adopted those principles as part of this approach. So we are exceeding what would be a shared burden of that ADG separation, or SEP 65. And where we do have private open space orientated towards the rear, it is quite modest, typically in this sort of form of development where you have sort of downsize a 3-bedroom apartment type product. Your terraces are in the order of 3 metres deep, often 7 to 10 metres wide. So they are sort of meeting that standard, but not exceeding it in terms of their dimension. They are usable in the sense that they have got a dimension of adequate depth and width, but they are by no means oversized terraces. Where we do have those terraces, the balance is really the composition of the upstand or how that balustrade has been detailed. And you'll notice there are upturn elements to the balustrading, particularly where we have that corner element, or where we are having an orientation towards the west in this instance. So there's a balance of both upturn balustrading and privacy screening. And obviously we do want to propose good amenity for the proposed occupants. So some level of translucent balustrading, in this instance glass, which is limited towards that southeastern corner, is there to enjoy the aspect. I think it would be doing an injustice to the proposed occupants if we were to simply try and enclose that balcony or screening in any further manner than has been done to date. So they're the key measures, along with the landscape quality along that rear setback, are really the measures that have been taken from a design sense to find that balance.
Thank you. Nothing further, Chair.
Thank you.
Peter, I have one further question.
Yes.
This is just to Greg Boston. Greg, I just want to clarify my understanding of your response in relation to what you heard from the other speakers, in particular 47 Greycliff. I understood that you indicated that you'd be in the panel's hands on whether 47 Greycliff would also be added to a dilapidation report condition, which currently just lists 8892 and any other properties that are that may be determined to be affected. Is my understanding of your response correct, that you'd have no objection to 47 being the third property listed there?
I wouldn't have any objection if the panel thought that should be incorporated. I've just got a thumbs up from the client, so we would be happy for that property to be also listed if that was the panel's ultimate decision.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you. Does the panel have any further questions? No, thank you. Well, that concludes the submissions from the registered objectors and the applicant in relation to item 4.1. The panel will now move on to item 4.2 on the agenda, 20 Avon Road, DY, DA 2022/1193 for demolition works and construction of a residential flat building, including strata subdivision. There are no objectors registered to speak. There are 3 persons registered to speak for the applicant. Michael Haynes of BBP Planners, Scott Walsh of Walsh Architects, and Hamish Humphreys of Gannett Developments on behalf of the applicant. Mr. Haynes, or do you wish to address the panel?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, panel. The DA before you is recommended for approval. I can confirm that the applicant has reviewed the council's assessment report and the draft conditions of consent, and the applicant's supportive of council's assessment. Just by way of background, briefly, this redevelopment of the site in the manner proposed has extended over this DA and a previous DA that went before the Land Environment Court. The proposed redevelopment of the site has involved significant engagement with council planners through those 2 DAs and the various internal referral bodies at council. The DA has involved a range of modifications over that time period to achieve what I think is a very acceptable outcome for the site, and I think council's comprehensive assessment report reflects that position. So there's no further issues that I'd like to raise at this point, but we would welcome any conditions that, any questions that the panel may have for us.
Yes, thank you. Well, I'll call on the other registered speakers for the applicant first before I ask the panel whether they have any questions. Mr. Walsh, do you wish to address the panel? Mr. Walsh with us?
Mr. Biscoe, I can't see Mr. Walsh in the meeting. I can call him in. I do have his contact number.
All right. Well, while we're waiting for him, Mr. Humphreys, would you like to address the panel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, just concur with Michael Haynes there. I've read and agree with the assessment report and accept the conditions that have been imposed. And if the panel have got any questions, more than willing to answer.
Yes, thank you. So we're just waiting to give Mr. Walsh an opportunity to join us. May I ask of the other speakers for the applicant, was it expected that Mr. Walsh would be joining us?
I believe he was.
Yeah, got Walsh joining.
Yeah.
Hello, Mr. Walsh, you're with the Northern Beaches Local Planning Panel.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony.
Right, I think Mr. Walsh is now with us. Mr. Walsh, you may not have heard the previous proceedings, but I'm giving the applicants, registered speakers for the applicant, the opportunity, if they wish, to address the panel. Do you wish to address the panel?
I don't specifically. I believe our town planner was going to say a few words, but we're more here to answer any questions that the panel may have on the application.
Right, thank you. Does the panel have any questions of any of the registered speakers for the applicant? No. All right.
Just one question, Chair, yes. If I may. Just wanted to inquire, I guess, in relation to the design proposition, whether there was any provision contemplated within the design for electrical distribution boards in the car parks to facilitate EV charging. Electric vehicle charging, sorry.
No. At this stage, no, we have not put any provisions in. That is something that the applicant said they will look at during the marketing process, but at this stage, no.
Okay, and in just for the panel's understanding, in I guess the applicant's opinion, are there any challenges associated with provisioning such infrastructure on this site?
No, so we're going to run Fairview basements similar to this. What we usually do is install a ring cord, a cable effectively, from the main switchboard, which wraps the basement. And then from that ring cord, then you can pull down off that and put your 32 amp charger sitting on the wall, and it can then charge your vehicles. Usually we go to someone like Jet Charge, and they manage the whole facility for the applicant or for the building operators, and they charge that for that usage. It comes off effectively the strata feed usage and gets charged back to that client, that whoever the owner is of that unit. So it's actually pretty easy infrastructure to do long term. It's just something that we're going to wait and see if the market demanded that or not.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Does the panel have any other questions? Right. Okay, then. Well, thank you for the speakers who have addressed us this morning in relation to item 4.2. That concludes the public meeting. As I indicated earlier, the panel will now retire into closed session to consider the two matters, the subject of the public meeting, plus the two non-public meeting items that I referred to at the outset. And it is usual for the panel to reach a decision on the same day and for the minutes recording the decision to be published on the Council's website within 24 hours. This public meeting is now closed.
Thank you.
I should just say the panel will reconvene in